Astounding Exploits Number 1, Cipher of the Chemist, an Ethan Fowler novel by Doc Runick. Chapter 4. Midnight Fight. In the distance, the church clock tower chimed 11:30 p.m. as Detective Ethan Fowler stepped out into the heavy snow. He pulled his wool jacket collar up around his favorite blue knit scarf. The scarf was a thank you gift from an officer's widow for bringing down the gangster corrupted officers who had killed her husband. It was warm, reminded him of the price of being a good cop, and to let no woman into his life. His job was dangerous enough. Without having to deal with a worried woman, he might leave a widow. He patted the hard spot where the interesting micro-camera watch was tucked away. Having that toy was like climbing into a detective story magazine. Ethan had grown up reading those astounding exploits and still subscribed to the weekly periodical. It had entertaining stories, plus bonus journalist pieces on improved police work, new developments for detectives, and interesting case reports from other parts of the world. It seemed odd, after years of beating down thugs, muggers, gangsters, and worse to be facing a real-world villain and using almost impossible technology. The black and gray sky, lit by the thousands of electric lamps and building spotlights, was pressing down so close Ethan felt if he jumped, he might touch the snow-heavy clouds. Walking, he grumbled to himself. The night was a complete bust. He didn't get to hear the new song. The thugs were just hired fools. The one good witness was in a coma, and he shouldn't show his face at Frank's diner for a few days until Levon cooled down about the mess he'd been part of. At least the paperwork was done, and he could still get home, and sleeping in a little late in the morning would mean a full night's rest. Being a detective had perks. He didn't like taking advantage of his position too often, but no one could fault him for a few extra hours of sleep on Sunday morning once they heard the reports. Ethan had been careful to leave any mention of the Rollins dame out of the report. The snow was already piling up over his shoes as he turned for home. The scraping of snow shovels followed him down the well-lit walk of Bleecker Street. His inexpensive apartment was not too large and only a few blocks away. New York wasn't as bright this far from the center of town. Still, it was his home, and in the snow, it even looked peaceful as he trudged along. Ethan's hand touched the rough edges of the folded papers that Dr. Russell had slipped to him before collapsing, and for which he may have died to keep them from Rollins. Ethan had left them out of the report and didn't mention them to the evidence clerk. At least one person would kill for what they contained. That Agent Singleton might be another such person. He was slippery, and Ethan's instincts warned him to handle that man with as much care as Lady Rollins. Ethan wasn't normally so cautious, but with a hypnotic green woman, a poisoned double-agent chemist, and a likely too patriotic DOI agent, a little extra precaution seemed best. Taking a left onto Jones St., he plunged into the darkness of his apartment's side street. Wind rattled the empty branches of oak trees overhead. Ethan let his eyes adjust and straightened his coat. The crunching of snow under several shoes behind him made his hairs jump straight up. Glancing back yielded no sign of a tag, but he couldn't see down Bleecker as both sides of Jones St. were boxed in with tall red brick apartment buildings. Concentrating on listening behind him, he continued past his building's door without looking at it. No need to tell them where he lived. Plus, his landlady would not take kindly to a fight in her building. The footsteps of at least 3 people followed. Between the falling snow and the street's deep shadows, he couldn't see who was behind him. Would Rollins make another grab at those papers tonight? So much for that good night's sleep. He continued keeping his pace even and tried using windows to see the pursuers. Coming out onto West 4th Street, he considered what to do. He still could not hear or see anything out of the ordinary, but he was sure there were several pairs of eyes boring holes into his back, waiting for just the right moment to jump him. He needed to go somewhere more public to draw out whoever was tailing him. From a half a block north came the sounds of singing. A choir's harmony floated in the night air, and Ethan allowed himself a small smile. The conversion of St. Paul's midnight mass at St. Joseph's was just about to start. Perfect, he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He could catch up on some of his debt to the Lord Almighty, or at least to Father Gregory, who'd been dogging him to come to church once in a while, and dodge the goons who were trailing him. Cutting left and then right at a fast jog, he was back in a well-lit area of 6th Street, and St. Joseph's Church glowed bright a block away. The tenant red brick building next to it giving way to more ornate, whitewashed stone-carved walls shone against the dark New York night. As in so many times before, the church was a bastion of hope and comfort to those caught in life's shadows. Dozens of people, dock workers with their wives, clerical workers, and of course, a handful of shabby-dressed local artists were gathering in front to chat as small groups made their way into the church. Father Gregory stood in the open doors, beaming a wide smile and greeting everyone to his special mass. Ethan made a beeline toward the crowd. As he passed between two parked cars to cross the street, he heard a noise behind him. Looking back, the pursuers were hiding no more. One spry fella in a sailor's pea coat was running full tilt. The small fella used the parked car to stop himself, ending close enough to get at Ethan. With blurring speed, the guy took a swing at Ethan's chin. Too late, Ethan realized it was a feint. The tough guy's other fist slammed Ethan's gut, doubling him over as all his air blew out in a steaming cloud of hot breath. Coughing, Ethan grabbed his belly and rubbed. "Not a bad shot for a half-pint," he coughed out. "You're nothing, Pops. I'm gonna knock your block off." Outside of having the wind knocked from him, which he hated, Ethan noticed a fair amount of pain, which was something he wasn't used to. A hit to the face, yes, or even the back, but a gut shot should not have been more than some slight discomfort, if that. This fellow was stronger than he looked. Fortunately, Ethan was used to the pains of a fight. Being out of air was something Ethan knew how to deal with. He stood up straight to stop compressing his lungs. Bringing himself to his full height, he stared down at his opponent right in his shifty little eyes. The peacoat said sailor, but the slicked-back hair and smart-mouth slang made him a docker. If these were just more local muscle, Ethan shouldn't have any problem with them. "You little—" Ethan took a step forward with each word. On the third, he swung. "Runt!" The blow felt too sluggish. Ethan knew the second he launched it. The spry, smirking runt ducked under it. Before Ethan could even register the dodge, another body shot, this one to his ribs, sent fresh ripples of pain through his torso. He did not fall. He made sure he did not fall. But it was a lot closer than he liked. The guy went in for another shot. Ethan shoved him off. Ethan outweighed the kid by at least 30 pounds, and that let him send the kid sliding backward on the icy walk, giving Ethan time to get his second wind. Pushing off the parked car, Ethan closed on the kid who was still trying not to fall on the ice. Ethan tossed him 3 hard punches, helping the kid land in a dirty pile of snow, face down and bleeding. Grabbing his sore ribs, Ethan looked back the way he came and saw more pursuers emerging from the darkened side street. 4 ugly brutes stepped out of the darkness and stopped, staring slack-jawed at Ethan and the downed kid. All 4 were a match set, and together they flexed their arms, making fists, muscles rippling like the steel cables of the Brooklyn Bridge under their coats. These were surely borrowed torpedoes. Behind them, a 5th man strolled into the light. The new man jerked his heat at Ethan and said something. 4 mountains lumbered toward Ethan, hands flexing and bowing into fists. It took Ethan no effort to realize the odds were not good and decide it was best to leave on a high note. "Gotta run." Ethan sprinted across the street, leaving the thugs flat-footed, but only for a moment. All too soon, Ethan heard the thud of their hobnailed boots on the bitumen behind him. He caught up to the back of the small crowd filing into the church to hear the midnight mass and wove his way closer to the doors. There was safety in numbers, and only a fool would start trouble in a New York crowd, especially a crowd of Irish Catholic dockers out with their wives. Touching his hat and mumbling greetings, Ethan moved through the small groups of chatting parishioners, making for the front of the church. Most of the crowd was people Ethan protected from criminals, politicians, and the occasional opinionated policeman. Many owed him a favor or two, and most he'd eaten a fine home dinner with at least once. Behind him, the torpedoes were not so well received. Ethan could hear them shoving people out of their way, trying to catch up. Disgruntled shouts and the sounds of pushing told him that these must be first-class fools, or just desperate. What the hell is on this piece of paper that has people so hot under the collar? "Hey, watch out! Apologize to my wife." "Scram, you bog Irish heathen!" That sinked it. These were borrowed torpedoes. The sounds of a scuffle came from behind Ethan as he pushed himself further into the crowd. A meaty thump of a fist hitting a jaw rolled over the crowd like lightning. Ethan reached the doors before turning to take in the scene. The women had moved out to the edge of the crowd. Ethan could see the four mountains who chased him here, caught in the middle of an irate mass of Irishmen, looking more like small hills now. The brutes stood back to back with each other, their beady little eyes looking out at the angry crowd. The look of confused fear on their faces made Ethan almost regret leading them into this trap. But only for a moment. With a wide smile, he turned and found Father Gregory frowning hard at him. "Up to your standard tricks, I see," Father Gregory said. "Honest, Father, I was just coming to hear this sermon you've been crowing about for weeks." A giant roar of voices came from behind, but Ethan's attention on Father Gregory meant he didn't see what sparked it. He and Father Gregory turned to see the crowd surging in on the torpedoes. It didn't take long. The four men were buried in a landslide of swinging fists and underhand kicks. In 2 minutes, they'd been knocked out and tossed into snow piles by the street. Proud Irish men pranced by Ethan and Father Gregory, tipping their hats with wide smiles. The wives on the men's arms shook their heads for Father Gregory, but all with that smirking smile only an Irish woman could give that said, "Now that's my proper man." Before Father Gregory could comment further, Ethan ducked through the door. The smell of incense teased at Ethan's nose, and the choir was doing a mighty fine job of drowning out the sounds of the men chatting about the great fight outside. Ethan stopped and gave the sign of the cross and took a pew at the back so he could leave unobserved once things had died down. Father Gregory walked past Ethan, giving him one solid roll of the eyes, then stepped to the front and waited for his people to quiet down. A well-tailored, tan-skinned man with a pencil mustache dressed in a dark striped charcoal suit took a seat a few spaces down from him, placing an expensive silk bowler hat on the pew. "That was a neat trick you pulled out there." His voice was strong but low, with a slight accent that sounded Dutch or German. Ethan turned at the sound and looked at the man seated near him. The man didn't take his gaze from the altar, but Ethan knew those words were for him. This was the lead man who Ethan had lost track of. "It's not a trick. Everyone knows better than to pick a fight in New York. Well, everyone but you lot. German?" The man smiled. "Americans are all so arrogant. It's no wonder your nation is bankrupt and failing." Ethan slid down next to the man as Father Gregory started his sermon. "Did those men work for you?" "I didn't say that. I observed that you used excellent tactics to come out victorious where you were outgunned." "What do you people want so bad?" "You must have me confused with someone else, Detective Ethan Bailey Fowler of the 5th Marines and occasional combat pilot. Not too far removed, I think, from the barnstorming piloting you did before joining the Marines. I'm surprised you let yourself get put into such a low position. Someone with your war record is destined for greater roles of responsibility. Would you not agree?" The man's head turned as he spoke, ending eye to eye with Ethan. Ethan met the look, taking the man in. He had a slight scar over his right eyebrow, his skin a pot-marked map of foxholes in cool pinks. On the right side of his neck, a large strawberry birthmark emerged from his white collar line. The man nodded, picked up his bowler, and with no respect for the church, stood and walked out. "Now, how did they get all that on me so fast?" Ethan mumbled to himself as he turned his attention back to Father Gregory. Thank you for listening. Before you go, please help support this channel by clicking like and subscribe. Do you want more? Step into the shadows of 1930s New York with Detective Ethan Fowler by joining the Astounding Exploits exclusive community, where you can not only talk with others about these thrilling tales, but also get early access to more of Ethan Fowler's adventures. You'll find the Astounding Exploits community at reamstories.com/runeick. The link is also in the description below. Join today and unlock the door to a world of intrigue, mystery, and non-stop action of the enigmatic, astounding exploits of Detective Ethan Fowler. Subscriptions help sustain these stories and all their associated costs. Again, thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode.